The ball was in 11 hours. Lenora Vane stood at the window of the servants' quarter and watched the delivery carts come up the drive, hothouse roses packed in wet muslin, crates of wine from somewhere that wasn't England, a chandelier component wrapped so carefully in cloth that 2 footmen carried it between them as though it might decide to leave. She had counted the carts. 7 so far. Her father had thrown parties like this once. She remembered the smell of them, beeswax and hothouse lilies, and something underneath, something warm, that she had decided as a child was what happiness smelled like. She knew better now. Vane, Mrs. Hollis appeared in the doorway with the particular expression she wore when she had not slept and did not intend to forgive anyone for it. The blue salon needs pressing, every curtain. Before noon. Yes, Mrs. Hollis. She had been Lenora Vane for 23 years. She had been a housemaid at Ashford Park for 6 weeks. The 2 facts sat inside her chest like stones that did not quite fit together. The house had belonged to her father. Before the debts, before the creditors, before Aldous Grimsby, her father's solicitor, had produced a document she had never seen and a signature she did not recognize, and the whole of Ashford Park, the grounds, the portraits, the silver, the graves in the churchyard that included her mother, had passed to a man named the Duke of Carwell. She had never met the Duke of Carwell. She did not particularly want to. What she wanted was the deed. Her father's real deed, not Grimsby's forgery. She knew it existed. She had found a letter 3 months ago in a London boarding house, tucked into the lining of her father's old traveling coat. A letter from his man of affairs, written 4 years before his death, confirming the deed had been filed separately from the estate papers, kept in the study behind the 3rd panel from the left. Her father had a habit of hiding things he considered important. He had hidden her mother's pearls in a teapot for 11 years and been surprised every Christmas when they turned up again. The study was on the ground floor of Ashford Park, which was why Lenora was pressing curtains in the blue salon, wearing a uniform that didn't quite fit and trying not to make eye contact with anyone who had known her family. It was not, she would have admitted to no one, a very good plan. It was the only one she had. The roses arrived in the front hall at 10:30. Lenora was passing through with an armorful of pressed linen when she saw them. Dozens of arrangements, cream and deep red, and a man in the center of the hall who was not supposed to be there yet because the Duke of Carwell was not expected until 3 o'clock. He was standing with his back to her, speaking to Grimsby. She recognized Grimsby immediately. The round shoulders, the way he held his hat in his hands as though strangling it. She had not seen him in 4 months, but she would have recognized him at twice the distance. She turned toward the service corridor. "You there?" She stopped. She turned back. The man who was not supposed to arrive until 3 o'clock was looking at her. He was younger than she had imagined. She had constructed a Duke of Carwell in her mind. Older, heavier, the sort of man who acquired properties the way other men collected walking sticks. This man was perhaps 30, dark-coated, watching her with an expression that was not unkind, but was entirely certain of its right to ask questions. "Is Mrs. Hollis about?" "In the kitchens, Your Grace." He nodded. "Tell her I've arrived early. The roads were better than expected." "Of course, Your Grace." She walked to the kitchens. She told Mrs. Hollis. She pressed 16 more curtains. She did not think about the way the Duke had looked at the roses as they were carried past, not with the satisfaction of ownership, but with something quieter, something almost uncertain. She decided it did not matter. The ball was for the county. That was what Mrs. Hollis said in the tone she used when explaining things that should not require explanation. The Duke of Carwell was establishing himself. Introductions, connections, the social architecture of a man settling into an inherited position. Every family of consequence within 30 miles had been invited. Every family, Lenora thought, pressing a flute of something she wasn't drinking, into the corner of the pantry and watching the guests arrive through a gap in the service door. Every family except the one that had built the house. She should not have been watching. She had duties. The canapé trays needed replenishing every 20 minutes, and the third footman had turned his ankle on the back stairs and was being heroically useless about it, which meant she was covering his work as well as her own. But the front hall, visible through the gap, was full of people her father had known, people who had sat at his table and praised his wine and borrowed his horses. She searched their faces without meaning to. She did not know what she was looking for. Recognition, perhaps, or the absence of it. Proof of how completely a person could be erased from a place that had once been entirely theirs. You'll take the eye out of someone, staring through a crack like that. She spun around. The Duke of Carwell was leaning against the pantry doorframe with his arms crossed and the patient expression of a man who had been watching her watch his party for slightly longer than was comfortable. She straightened. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. I was watching the guests arrive, checking on the canapé situation, through a crack in the door." She met his eyes. It was a mistake. He had gray eyes, the kind that did not give much away and seemed to know it. "The third footman is incapacitated," she said. "I was assessing the traffic flow in the hall to determine the optimal timing for the next tray." A pause. "That is," he said, "the most elaborate explanation for eavesdropping I have encountered this year. It's only October, Your Grace." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. An acknowledgement, perhaps, that she had said something he had not expected. "Your name," he said. "Vane, Your Grace." He looked at her for another moment in that unhurried, entirely unreadable way. Then he pushed off the doorframe. "See to the canapés, Vane." "Yes, Your Grace." He walked back toward the ballroom. She waited until she could no longer hear his footsteps before she let out a breath. Grimsby, she thought, would be in the card room. He always found the card room. And the study was 3 doors from the card room. She picked up the canapé tray and walked toward the ballroom. It took her 40 minutes to find a gap. The card room was fuller than she had hoped. Grimsby and 4 other men she didn't recognize. A fire that was burning too hot. A smell of cigars that would take days to clear. She passed the door twice with the tray. On the second pass, Grimsby was telling a story about a property dispute in Wiltshire, gesturing with his glass, commanding the room's attention, with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 40 years making sure other people were looking at him and not at his hands. The study door was unlocked. She had 30 seconds, perhaps less. She closed the door behind her and crossed to the paneling on the left wall. First panel. Second. Third from the left. Her fingers found the seam before her eyes did, a slight give. The kind of gap that looked like a flaw in the carpentry and was not. She pressed. The panel didn't move. She pressed again, harder, searching for the mechanism her father would have used. He had been particular about such things, had taken a quiet pride in the cleverness of them. There would be a lever, or a notch, or the door opened behind her. She turned. The Duke of Carwell stood in the doorway. He looked at her. He looked at the paneling. He looked at her again. The house was not quiet. She could hear the orchestra from the ballroom 2 rooms away, playing something light and bright and entirely inappropriate for this moment. "Vane," he said. "Your Grace, what are you doing in my study?" She had prepared for this. In the abstract way, she had prepared for everything. Not with a specific plan, but with the knowledge that she would need one eventually. She had practiced answers that were deflections, answers that were partial truths, answers that were complete fabrications. What she said was, "I was looking for something that belongs to me." He was quiet for a moment. "In my study. Behind that panel, if I've done my arithmetic correctly." Another silence. Outside, the orchestra concluded something in 3/4 time, and the assembled county of Shropshire applauded. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "Explain," he said. She looked at him. He had not called for Grimsby. He had not called for anyone. He had closed the door, which meant he was willing to hear what she said before he decided what to do about it. And it was more than she had expected. She told him. Not everything, not at first. She gave him the shape of it, the way you might describe a country you had been to once. The boundaries, the general terrain, the fact of the thing. Her father, the estate, the deed, Grimsby's document, which had appeared 14 months after her father's death, and bore a signature her father's own hand could not have written in the last year of his life, when the tremor had made signing his own letters an exercise in patience. The Duke listened. He did not interrupt. He did not move from where he was standing, near the door, and she did not move from where she was standing, near the paneling, and the orchestra in the ballroom began something new. "That's a serious accusation," he said when she had finished. "Yes, against Grimsby." "Yes, my solicitor." "Your solicitor," she agreed, "who was also my father's, until he wasn't." He looked at the panel. "You believe the deed is behind there. My father hid important things. I have a letter from his man of affairs confirming the location." She paused. "I was not going to steal anything. I want only what was my father's, what is mine by right." "You've been in my house for 6 weeks," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, working as a housemaid. The position was advertised, to find a piece of paper hidden in a wall, to retrieve a document that would demonstrate that the transfer of this estate was fraudulent." He crossed the room. She held her ground, which took more effort than she would have liked, because he was considerably larger than she had registered from a distance, and the study was not a large room. He stopped beside her. He looked at the panel. "Third from the left," he said. "Third from the left." He pressed the panel. Nothing. He ran his thumb along the upper edge, slowly, until he found something she had not. A small recessed notch barely wide enough for a fingertip. He pressed it. The panel swung inward. Behind it, a shallow space, perhaps 8 inches deep, a metal box, the kind used for documents, unlocked. He stepped back. She looked at him. "It's your panel," he said. She opened the box. Inside, 3 documents, folded, the paper the particular ivory yellow of something that had sat undisturbed for years. She lifted the first one, her father's handwriting. She would have known it anywhere. The long descenders, the habit he had of pressing too hard on the capital letters, so they were always slightly darker than the rest. Her eyes were doing something inconvenient. She pressed her thumb and forefinger against the bridge of her nose and waited for it to stop. "Is it there?" the Duke asked. "Yes," she said. "It's here." She did not go back to the ball. She sat in the study while the Duke of Carwell returned to his guests, and she read the deed twice, and the 2 other documents. Her father's correspondence with his man of affairs, confirming the filing, confirming the dates. It was all there. Everything she needed. She had expected to feel triumphant. She felt instead extraordinarily tired. Mrs. Hollis found her an hour later and did not say anything about the fact that a housemaid was sitting in the Duke's study with documents spread across the desk. She said only, "There's tea in the kitchen," and left the door open behind her. Lenora folded the documents. She put them inside her dress, against her ribs, which was not comfortable and also not negotiable. She went to the kitchen and drank the tea. 3 days passed. She continued her work. She did not know what else to do. The documents were real, but documents required a solicitor to present them, and a solicitor required money, and money was not something she had in abundance. She had written to her father's man of affairs in London, the one who had written the original letter, but he was elderly and unwell, and his response had been cautious in the way that responses from elderly, unwell men often were when the matter involved contradicting a well-established solicitor. On the 3rd evening, the Duke sent for her. She had anticipated this. She had told herself she had anticipated it calmly. She had been, in the hour after Mrs. Hollis relayed the message, decidedly not calm, in the privacy of the linen closet where no one could see her. He was in the study again. He had a letter on the desk in front of him. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "I've been making inquiries," he said, "about Grimsby." She waited. "It is not," he said carefully, "the first time his name has appeared in a context that requires inquiry." He paused. "There was a matter in Herefordshire 4 years ago. An estate, an elderly owner, no children, a will that looked correct until it did not." He set the letter down. "The matter was not pursued, because Grimsby is well connected," Lenora said, "because the complainant was not." She looked at him. He looked at the letter. "I did not purchase this estate in bad faith," he said. "I want to be clear about that." I know," she said. And she did know, she realized, had known, probably, since the night of the ball. He had stood in this room while she told him she believed his solicitor had defrauded her family, and he had opened the panel. That was not the behavior of a man who had something to hide. "What I would like to know," he said, "is whether you are willing to pursue this through proper channels. With the document you found," he paused, "I can provide the solicitor a different one." She was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she asked. He looked at her. There was something in his expression she had not seen before. Something that was not quite discomfort, but was in the neighborhood of it, as though he were saying something he was not certain how to say. "Because I have been living in a house for 6 weeks," he said. "That was apparently never mine to live in. And because the woman who should have been its mistress has been pressing my curtains." He paused. "And because Grimsby has been in my household for 3 years, and I find I am considerably angrier about that than I expected to be." She said nothing for a moment. "He'll fight it," she said. "Yes, it will take time. Yes, and money. I am aware." He met her eyes. "I am also a duke, Miss Vane. There are occasional advantages." She looked at the letter on his desk. She looked at the window, through which she could see the edge of the formal garden her father had planted in the year she was born, the particular curve of the yew hedge he had shaped himself on Sunday afternoons when he thought no one was watching. "My father planted those yews," she said. He followed her gaze. "I know," he said. "Mrs. Hollis told me." A silence. "She knows who I am," Lenora said. "It was not a question. She's known since the 3rd day. She kept it to herself." He paused. "She is, I suspect, the reason the panel was not discovered before you could reach it." Lenora thought of Mrs. Hollis appearing in the doorway of the study that night. There's tea in the kitchen. The door left open. Something in her chest shifted, loosened, in a way that was uncomfortable only because of how long it had been closed. "I accept your offer," she said. "Of the solicitor." He nodded. "And in the interim," he said, "I would suggest you stop pressing curtains." "Someone has to," she said. "Someone," he agreed, "who is not the rightful heir to the property." She looked at him. He was watching her with that gray-eyed steadiness that she was beginning to understand was not blankness. It was attention. The careful, considered attention of a man who had learned at some point to watch the room rather than perform for it. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Vane." She stood. She crossed to the door. "One question," he said. She paused. "The night of the ball, when I found you in here," he paused. "You told me the truth." Immediately, without attempting a different explanation first. "Why?" She thought about it. "You closed the door," she said. "Behind you when you came in. You didn't call for anyone first. You just closed the door." She paused. "I decided that was worth honesty." He was quiet for a moment. "Good night, Miss Vane." "Good night, Your Grace." The case against Grimsby took 4 months. It was not clean, and it was not quiet. And there was a period in January when the opposing solicitor produced a witness who claimed to have been present at the signing, and Lenora sat in a cold anteroom in London and thought, very specifically, about her father's tremor, the way he had apologized for it, the way he had signed Christmas cards sitting sideways at the table, so that no one would see the effort it required. She had kept one of those Christmas cards. She produced it. The witness withdrew. On the 14th of February, which was not, Lenora thought, a date she would have chosen, the deed was registered in her name. Ashford Park and its grounds and its contents, including the portraits and the silver and the graves in the churchyard, which could not be owned but could be visited, which was perhaps sufficient. She stood on the front steps in the cold and looked at the drive and did not know, immediately, how she was supposed to feel. The Duke of Carwell appeared behind her, coatless and apparently unbothered by the temperature. "Congratulations," he said. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. I had a stake in the outcome," he said. "I prefer not to have purchased stolen property." Nevertheless, he came to stand beside her, which put him close enough that she was aware, in a way she had been avoiding being aware of for approximately 4 months, of how tall he was, and that he had spent 4 months attending hearings and writing letters and appearing in rooms where Grimsby's associates had looked at him with expressions they thought were subtle. "You'll need a staff," he said. "I have a staff. You've been paying them. An arrangement that requires renegotiation." He paused. "Mrs. Hollis has indicated she would prefer to stay." "Mrs. Hollis can do whatever she likes," Lenora said. "Within reason. She said you'd say that." A silence. The drive was empty. Beyond the gate, the lane ran south toward the village, and beyond that, somewhere too far to see, London and Grimsby, who had resigned his practice and was relocating to the continent in the way that men did when the continent was the last remaining option. "What will you do?" she asked. "I have other properties," he said. It was a simple statement, and it was true, and it contained inside it several things neither of them had said, which were not yet ready to be said but were present. Nonetheless, the way the yew hedge was present even under snow, patient and shaped and waiting for the season to change. "You could visit," she said, "if you had occasion." He looked at her. "Occasion," he said, "or without occasion. If you found yourself in Shropshire—" "I find myself in Shropshire with some regularity." Then she said, "You know where the house is." He looked at the drive. She looked at the drive. The cold settled around them both, with the comfortable indifference of English winter, and somewhere in the garden, past the formal hedge and the bare rose beds and the yews her father had planted in the year she was born, a bird was making the particular noise birds make when they have decided against all available evidence that spring is coming. "Miss Vane," he said. "Your Grace," she said. Neither of them moved to go inside.